Hello, students. Our player is severely at a disadvantage in our game right now. There is only one light zone that is constantly shrinking. There are enemies spawning all over the battlefield, chasing him, damaging him, and there's no way for him to fight back. In this video, we give him that weapon. We're going to introduce a mechanic expansion to our light zone mechanic. We're going to create collectible orbs that are scattered throughout the battlefield. And anytime a player collides with an orb, we will collect it and spawn a brand new light zone. This will create pockets of safety for our player where they can stay and survive and heal as long as they avoid enemy collisions. So let's head over to our computer screen right now and we'll dive into this video on our mechanic expansion. So I have lesson 7 starter file open right here in vscode.dev. I'm going to minimize this browser tab for right now, and I will open up our file directly. So lesson number 7 from our Glowfield folder. All right, and let's look at what we've got here for this video to start. So here is our game. Enemies should be spawning. All right, so there's our enemy spawning in, but wait a minute, you told me, this poor guy, he says, you told me you'd give me a way to fight back. There is nothing, no more light zones. And I died, no surprise. So there is no method right now for our enemy to fight back. We have to build that system in this video. We are going to build our system for orbs. So mission number 1, we are going to adjust the orb system constants. It's no surprise. Anytime we implement a brand new system into our game, we're going to first start by defining some constants that we can use to tweak the system, tune the system, and those are going to be in our student edit zone. So let's go look to see what we have. Right here was constants for our player system and our light system and our health system and our ramp system and our enemy system, and look at that. Now we have our orb system. So we are going to control the orb count. How many orbs do we want to have that are scattered throughout the battlefield? What is their size? What is their delay when they respawn? Okay, and then what is the light radius, or the radius of the light that they are going to create? So let's go through these a little bit more in depth. The orb count. We're going to have a certain number of orbs that are scattered through the battlefield, and that will always be that number. They'll always be present. So I'm going to say I want 4 of them scattered throughout the battlefield. And we're going to make them circular, and I'm going to make them the same size as the player, same size as the enemy. So the orb radius is going to be 14. Now, when we collect one of these, the player is going to pick it up, and then we're going to wait a little bit before we respawn that orb that was picked up back into the battlefield. I'm going to wait 2 seconds, so I'll say just 2. And when we pick up the orb, we are going to create a light zone that has a specific radius. It's not going to be the same as our starting light zone because this is like the biggest one. They're going to be smaller pockets of light that we create. So I'm going to use a radius of 150 pixels. All right, so I'm pretty happy with those system constants. Let's scroll down and see what else we have for this new system. It looks like we've got 3 different colors. I've got a ring color, a fill color, and a core color. All right, and so they're all of varying transparency. So it looks like these 2 colors are the same, right? The ring color and the fill color, except this one is extremely transparent. We'll almost be able to see none of it, and this one's not that transparent at all. I think what this is going to do for us is make like a really cool like glow effect, and then our core color is just going to be black that is transparent. So we've seen that before, just like with our enemy. All right, and if we look at our gameplay variables for this system, we've got one new variable, and that is an array called orbs, because we're going to be spawning multiple orbs into the battlefield. We need a place to put them. We're going to put them in this container, our container array called orbs. With that, let's look at mission number 2. Mission number 2, we want to reset our orb system. So this is happening in our reset game to defaults. So if we're playing our game and we die, we want to reset all of the orbs. So we're going to ensure all orbs are initialized correctly. Well, I think the first thing we should do is we're going to have a container that has some orbs in it, right? Like if we played the game, there's probably like a handful of orbs. We want to empty that container out. So that's an important thing you should do on the start of any game. And now if we look, we're trying to spawn orbs. So I'm going to jump down. I'm assuming we've got a spawn orb function. let's look at our new functions here. Okay, so anytime we got a new system, we've got to generate the orb data, and it looks like that's where mission 3 is going to bring us. We've got to spawn the orbs. Okay, so that's where mission 4 is going to take us. And then we update our orbs. Okay, and that's a bunch of missions too. So remember, with a new system, we have to generate data for the system. We have to spawn objects for that system, and then we have to update the objects within that system. That structure of those 3 functions we've seen with orbs. We have them here for enemies, update enemies, spawn enemies, generate enemy data, and we had it for our light system, update lights, spawn light, generate lights. So we're seeing this structure over and over again, but I don't think we're calling our spawn orb function correctly. I think we're trying to use a for loop, which is a good idea because we want to do this. How many times do we want to do this over and over and over again? Well, let's look here. It says for let I equal 0. So we're going to start at 0, I less than 0. Well, I is not less than 0. I is equal to 0. So our for loop is never going to run here. But if I change this to say like, I don't know, let's say 3. Well, I is 0. We'll spawn an orb. And then we increase I by 1. So now I is 1. 1 is less than 3, so we spawn an orb. Then we increase it to 2. 2 is less than 3, so we spawn an orb. And then we increase it to 3. 3 is not less than 3, so then we stop. But I guess, how many orbs do we want to spawn? Do we want to just spawn 3 orbs? I don't know. Do we have something that's controlling how many orbs we are going to spawn? I think we do. It's, yeah, right here. It's that constant orb count that we defined. So we got to make sure we use the orb count in our for loop. So we don't want to check to see if I is less than 3. We're going to check to see if I is less than the orb count constant variable that we created. This is now going to run the spawn orb function for when I is 0, when I is 1, when I is 2, and when I is 3. And when I becomes 4, 4 is not less than 4, so the for loop will stop. And if you look, how many times is it going to run? It's going to run 0, 1, 2, 3, which makes 4 times. So we'll get 4 orbs. That's perfect. And if we change orb count to say like, oh, we want 7 orbs, it's going to run 7 times and create the orbs for us. Mission number 2 is done. Of course, look at mission number 3. We got to actually create this data structure. So right now, even if I refresh the game, there's no orbs being played. We're calling spawn orb, but spawn orb is doing nothing for us. So first thing that we got to do is generate our orb data. So inside of this function, we're returning an object that has 4 properties. Those 4 properties are an X position, a Y position, a variable that's keeping track of whether or not the orb is alive, and it's set to false, and then a respawn timer. All right, so let's look at what we're going to do here. When we spawn an orb, I want to have them randomly be spawned throughout the battlefield, much like our enemy was randomly spawned. So let's go look at what we did for the enemies spawning. All right, so we randomly picked an X value for our generate enemy data. We used the enemy radius to keep it within the bounds, and we did something similar for our Y value, taking the HUD height into account. So I think we'll do that exact behavior, but instead of enemy radius, we should use the orbs radius. So our X value, we're going to say, hey, let's randomly spawn it horizontally, so random. And we could do 0 to width, but then part of our orbs could potentially be spawned off the screen because our X and Y values are going to be the center of the orb. So we're going to move it in by the orb radius to the right, and then we'll subtract to move it back to the left, the orb radius. And in the Y direction, we're going to do something similar. We'll do random. And we don't want the orbs to spawn in the HUD. That would be bad. So we're going to start down by HUD height and then shift it down the orb radius again. So HUD height plus orb radius. All right, and then we got to give the final, the largest Y value is going to be all the way down to the height of our canvas, and then we'll subtract the orb radius to bring us back up. All right, I love tab. Tab for autocomplete is great. Now, our orbs are going to be keeping track of whether they're alive, meaning they're drawn in the battlefield and we can collect them, or they're not alive, we're not going to draw them and we're not going to collect them. Because remember, we set a cooldown of what? Like a respawn cooldown of, I think it was like 2 seconds. So when a player picks them up, if the orb is set to true, we can interact with it. If the alive property is set to true, we can interact with it. We can pick it up. And the moment we pick it up, we'll set it to false, which means don't draw it, don't interact with it. And once our timer goes down to 0, we'll respawn it. And when we respawn it, we'll set it back to true. Since we're spawning it right now, we should probably make it alive so we can interact with it. And our respawn timer, there's no need to give it a value. We'll just keep it at 0 because we haven't yet picked it up. But once we do pick it up, we'll set it to orb respawn delay in seconds, which is 2 seconds. We'll count that down, 1.5, 1.5, and when it hits 0, we'll set the alive property back to true. So for right now, we'll set it to 0. Mission number 3, our orb data object is done. That right there represents an orb. How cool. So what do we got to do next? Well, we got to spawn our orbs, because remember, we were calling our spawn orb function, but look at it. It's just completely empty. Right now, that spawn orb function just got called 4 times with that for loop that we wrote in mission 2, but nothing is happening. We're not doing a single thing. That's pretty sad. So let's do something. We got to spawn our orbs into the game world and use our generator function. So we're going to use our generate orb data. Remember, the orbs are going to live in an array called orbs. That's our container. And so I want to push into the end of the container a brand new orb object. Where do I get that orb object? From our generate orb data function. All right, so when I call generate orb data right here, this function runs and it returns to us our orb object that has our X, Y, alive, and respawn timer seconds properties. I take that object and I push it into my array. So the first time I run this, the array is empty, and then I call it and I get my orb 1. I'll say orb 1. And then the next time it runs, I put orb 2 in, and then orb 3, and then orb 4, and I stop because I'm only running that for loop 4 times. So now I got my 4 orb objects. Let's see if we finally see some orbs here in the game. Ah, what a bummer. No orbs. Well, let's think about why this is, right? Game development, 3 layers. We have to define our data. We have to update our data, and we have to draw the data. So we've defined the data, but we're not drawing it. So I hope with all of my being that mission number 5 has us drawing our orbs. Yes, I'm very happy here. Mission number 5 puts us in the draw orbs function. I always like to check. Draw orbs. Are we calling it inside draw scene? We are. So we're now drawing our background, our lights, our orbs, our enemies, our player, our HUD, and our overlays if certain conditions are met. So draw orbs. What do we do? Well, first we say, give me a marker that is invisible so you don't see the outline of the shape I'm about to draw. And then we loop through every single orb. We loop through our entire container of orbs. And it looks like we ask a question. It says, if exclamation orb.alive. All right, so I think this is new. So we're targeting the orb's alive property. This is either going to be true or false. And the exclamation point means not. So if it's not alive, what are we going to do? Meaning it's dead. The alive property is set to false. We're just going to continue for that orb, meaning we're not going to run any of this code for the particular orb we are on, and we're going to move on to the next one. So we're not going to draw an orb if its alive property is set to false, which is really great. That's exactly what we want to do. So if we look, we are only going to be doing this for orbs that are currently in the alive state. So let's draw those orbs right now. We are going to take and probably put some paint in our paint bucket. So let's start by putting, what do we want to do? What colors were we working with? I'm going to go back up to my color palette. Oh, we're going to draw a ring, then a fill, and then a core. And I think these are going to be just like decreasing circles in size. So we'll have a ring, a fill, and a core. Let's do the ring first. The ring is going to be the biggest. So I'm going to put that paint in my paint bucket. So I'm going to say fill, orb, ring, color. And then I'm going to draw a circle. And the X and Y value of the center of this circle is going to be the particular orb's X coordinate and the particular orb's Y coordinate. And then the size of this circle will be orb radius, and I'm going to multiply. I'm going to make this a big circle. I'm going to multiply by 2.6. Let's see if we see that circle now when I refresh the game. Ooh, look at that. I've got a bunch of orbs-ish. All right, so 1, 2, 3. Where'd my fourth one go? Oh, there's my fourth one. And it's hard to see because this is a super transparent background, right? That's a super transparent color. It's sort of like that's going to be the glow of a smaller circle. So now let's put the fill color in. So we're going to put our paint in our paint bucket, orb fill color. And I'm going to draw another circle at orb.x, orb.y, and this time we're going to make the circle smaller. So it's going to be orb radius, and instead of multiplying by 2.6, I'm going to multiply by 2. So this is going to be our primary circle, and it's going to sit on top of this bigger circle, and the overhang part of this bigger circle is going to be like our glow color. Ooh, and look at that. It looks super cool. It's like it's glowing. It's got this like faded effect. But we're missing one key thing. We need the core of the orb. So now let's put the core in. So we'll do fill, I think it was orb core color. And now we'll draw an even smaller circle. So I'm going to do fill, or not fill, I'm sorry. We'll draw a circle, circle, orb.x, orb.y, and we'll do orb radius. And we'll do orb radius. We'll just leave it as the radius itself, just orb radius. So now refresh the page. Ooh, there are our completed orbs being drawn. So this looks super cool. So now if I go over and I pick one up, no, I want to pick this up. I want to pick it up. I can't pick it up yet. So we've drawn the orbs, but now we have to program our player to interact with them, right? So we've got to update the orbs. We defined the data. We drew the data. In mission number 6 here, we are going to begin to update the data. So mission 6 has us detect the player orb collision. So if you look here, it puts us inside of a function called check player orb collisions. Before we look at this, let's just make sure that this is getting called every single frame. So I'm going to jump up to the top of my, top third of my code here. And let's look. Here are built-in P5 game functions, our setup, which runs once at the start of every game, and then our draw function. It runs every single frame. If our game mode is play, we're updating our ramp, our player, our lights, our health, our enemies, our orbs. So that's good. Our orbs are getting updated. And then we're checking for collisions between the player and the enemy, and the player in the orbs. So this function that we're working in is getting called every frame of our game. That's super important. What are we doing? Well, we're looping through every single orb in our array, our container of orbs. And for that orb, if the orb is alive, meaning if the player is allowed to interact with it and we're drawing it to the screen, we're getting dx, dy, which is the horizontal distance between the orb and the player, and the vertical distance between the orb and the player, and we're calculating our hit zone. It's the orb's radius plus the player's radius. I believe we have seen this calculation before for circle-to-circle collisions. We want to detect, is a collision going on? We're asking if the orb and the player are colliding. But right now it just says if false. That's not right. If the orb and the player are colliding, so we'll say orb and player collide, then look what we do. We set the alive property of the orb to false because we just picked it up. And now we set the respawn timer to 2 seconds. And we're going to count that down. And when it goes back to 0, we'll respawn it back into the field. So how do we determine whether the orb and the player are collided? Well, some of you may already know. Some of you might be saying, it's the Pythagorean theorem. And if you are, wonderful. And if you're not, it's okay. Let's just take 1 minute here to quickly sketch this out. Here is our orb, okay? Here is our orb. Here is our player. They are some distance away. Zoop. That distance is called our length. That distance can be thought of as having a horizontal part. I'll call that dx. And a vertical part, dy. In order to solve for that length, we can use the Pythagorean theorem, which says a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. So substituting in, if this is a and this is b, and our longest side of our triangle, our hypotenuse, is c, I can write dx squared plus dy squared is equal to length squared. Not too bad, not too bad. And so I want to solve for the length, so I'll take the square root of both sides, and I get that the length is the square root of dx squared plus dy squared. Now, as our player moves closer and closer and closer to the orb, that length gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. But when do we know that the player has collided with the orb? Well, here's my player. They have a radius, r. I'll call it r1. And here's my orb. My orb has a radius. I'll call it r2. So player, orb. If we add those radii up together, I'm going to refer to that as my hit zone. Because if this length right here becomes smaller than our hit zone, we know that the player and the orb are overlapping and it is time for a collision. So if the length is less than or equal to our hit zone, it's collision time. So I'm going to, instead of writing length, I'm going to substitute in the square root of dx squared plus dy squared is less than or equal to our hit zone. Except we don't really like taking square roots when we don't have to. And I don't have to do it here. And the reason why is I can square this side. I can square this side. What I do to one side of my equation, I can do to the other. Squaring a square root cancels them, and I get dx squared plus dy squared is less than or equal to the hit zone squared. And that is our check for our collisions. That means if this condition is true between our player and our orb, then our player has just picked up the orb. So let's write that in. We've got a dx, we've got a dy, and we've got a hit zone. All we've got to do is leverage the Pythagorean theorem. Dx squared plus dy squared is less than or equal to hit zone squared. If that is true, we have just picked up an orb and it's time to make them false. So let's check this out. If I refresh the page, can I pick up an orb? All right, so here's an orb. Hey, it's gone. Can I pick up an orb? Hey, it's gone. Hey, it's gone. It's working. The collision is working. Except, wait a minute. Those orbs are supposed to come back. They're supposed to respawn back into the battlefield. They're not doing that. And they're also supposed to generate some light for me. None of that is working. So I'm just picking them up and leaving them. Then nothing is happening. So let's try to fix this system. Mission number 7 is going to have us handle the orb respawn timing. All right, so this is going to bring us back in, bring our orbs back in. And this is putting us in our update orbs function. We know that this gets called every single frame. We saw it earlier when we were looking at our P5 draw function. We are looping through all of our orbs in the container orbs. And if the orb is not alive, so meaning the player has picked that up, if it's not alive, what are we doing? Well, we're going to look at if it's time to respawn the orb. So the orb is not alive. So that means its respawn timer was just set to, what did we set it to? Orb respawn delay seconds. So its timer is set to 2 seconds. So what we got to do is we got to lower that timer. Right now we're lowering it by 0, which makes no sense. We want to lower it by some time interval, dt. All right, so we're going to lower it by the amount of time that has passed since the last frame. And then we are asking a question that says, if false. Huh? That makes no sense because false is always false. That's not a question at all. If we look, what is this question doing? Well, it looks like it's generating some new orb data for us. And it's taking that orb and it's updating the X position, the Y position, the alive property, and our respawn timer seconds. So it's almost like this is asking the question, hey, is it time to respawn the orb? So how do we determine if it's time to respawn the orb and get it back into the battlefield? Well, we take our orb's respawn timer seconds, which we just decreased on the previous line. So it was at 2 seconds. We brought it down to like 1.8, 1.6, 1.4, 1.2. Then it's keep going. It's like 0.2. And now it is at 0. It's time to respawn. So we're going to check to see if that timer is less than or equal to 0. And if that is the case, we're generating new orb data for our orb. Let's see if this works. So I pick one up, I pick another one up. They should respawn in 2 seconds. Look at that, they do. Oh, that's great. So now I feel more confident. I feel like I could beat this game. Wait a minute. I can't beat this game because I'm just picking them up and respawning them. Right now, they're useless. They're not providing any benefit to me. So we're on that was mission number 7. We only got one mission left. I hope it's the mission that gives us some power. And it looks like it is because it's all about creating light. This puts us in our check player orb collision. So we just previously looked at when we collide with an orb, we trigger the respawn timer. So we know we're colliding with the orb right here. And when we collide with the orb, we are going to create a brand new light source. This is where our game is going to completely shift in how it plays. When we collect an orb, we are going to generate a new light source. We are going to call spawn light. Remember, we have that function which can spawn a light for us, and it's going to take in an X position, a Y position, and a radius. So we want to spawn a light at the exact location where we picked up the orb. So this orb has an X and Y position, and when I pick it up, I want to spawn a light at that orb's X and Y position. So in my for loop here, we have the orb variable. We're going to use the orb's X position, the orb's Y position. And then what else did we need? I think I needed a third thing here for spawn light. I got to go look at the spawn light function. Let's just make sure we're giving this function the information it needs to operate. It needs an X value, a Y value, right, and it needs to know how big to make the light source, a radius. So I guess we could put in like any number we want. We could put in like 100 or 70, but I think we had a constant that we defined called orb light radius. So when we collect an orb, it is going to create a light source of a radius of 150 pixels. Whew, let's see. Is this where the tides turn? Is this where our player now has a way to survive a little bit longer? So our main light zone is shrinking. I'm going to go collect this orb out here. I'm going to take some damage, but I get a brand new light zone and I can survive in the light. Oh, this feels strong. I really am enjoying this. Whoa, oh my goodness, but there's now a lot of enemies chasing me. You can see these enemies keep spawning in. They keep spawning. We're supposed to get 5 enemies in total, right? And I think I got my 5 enemies on the screen. So no more enemies should be spawning. And right now, this is just like a game of cat and mouse because, oh, I'm dead. My player can move through the battlefield. We can spawn more light sources that will keep us alive longer. But we don't yet have a mechanism that's going to deal damage to the enemy. Because once I hit those 5 total enemies, those enemies are there and they're just going to chase me. I want a way to fight the enemies. In our next video, we're going to add some game polish, which gives us some visual improvements. And one of those improvements is going to be kind of like a visual improvement of dealing damage to the enemy. It's a way for us to really, truly fight back. So I'll see you in that next video.